Будем начинать тогда. Уважаемые коллеги, дорогие друзья, добрый вечер. То, к чему вы подключились, это коллоквиум отделения теоретической прикладной лингвистики. Наш последний в этом семестре ноябрьский коллоквиум. И я с огромным удовольствием хотел бы представить нашего сегодняшнего докладчика. Это Ора Матушанская. Она перед вами. О Боре можно говорить очень много. Она закончила в 2002 году соответствующую профильную кафедру Массачусетского технологического института и защитила диссертацию, которая называется Movement of Degree / Degree of Movement. После этого, прошло уже какое-то время, хотя 2002 год, видимо, в целом был вчера, Ора совершила какое-то совершенно невероятное количество всего в совершенно невероятном количестве областей лингвистики. Начиная от фонологии русских яров, заканчивая теорией head-movement и семантикой числительных. Да, вот мне кажется, если про кого-то можно сказать, что человек универсальный гений, то это, несомненно, Ора. Вот. Но мы здесь отдельно, независимо вот от перечисленного, знаем и любим Ору за ее работы по русскому языку. Потому что то, что она сделала для русского языка и с русским языком, это исключительно важно для того, как мы теперь понимаем очень и очень многие явления. Да, студенты нашего второго курса, которые занимаются русской морфологией, знают Ору по ее совместной с Морисом Халли, например, статье про словоизменения прилагательных, по ее статье про третий ер и вторичный имперфектив, да, по ее статье о предлогах и приставках. Это вот я перечисляю только то, что лежит в нашей папочке по русской морфологии, которой пользуются студенты второго курса. Да, есть много лет циркулирующий, но так, видимо, пока и не превратившийся в статью хэндаут про глагольное словоизменение. В общем, перечислять это можно бесконечно, можно просто брать список трудов и про каждую работу в этом списке много чего говорить, но я на этом думаю, что мне пора уже будет остановиться, да, и, собственно, на этом передать слово нашему сегодняшнему докладчику Ора Матушанская, и ее сегодняшний доклад называется Russian nominalizations as a window to the verbal theme. Ора уполномочила меня сказать, что сам доклад будет происходить на английском языке, но вопросы можно задавать на обоих. Вот. Ну, я немножечко злоупотребил, так сказать, возможностью представляющего и провел это представление по-русски, но в целом, конечно, наш сегодняшний рабочий язык английский. Спасибо большое, уважаемые коллеги. Ора Матушанская и ее доклад Russian nominalizations as a window to the verbal theme. Пожалуйста.
Спасибо большое, Сережа. Это было очень лестно. Вот чего вы не знаете, кстати, это что очень-очень давно, по-моему, в 1987 году я ходила на лингвистический кружок Атипла. Это было очень давно. Okay. I will switch to English. I'm okay with being interrupted. If it happens to be the case that I speak too fast, indicate it in some way, okay? I can go way too fast. I am I will try to put the handout into the chat so as to allow you to look at it parallel to the presentation. Oh, I cannot do screen sharing. У меня нет привилегий, чтобы показать вам свой экран.
Try it now.
Okay. Okay. Is it big enough?
It's fully legible.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. So Sergey has mentioned that I did some work on the phonology of the Russian verb with Morris Halley. This, in a way, is a part of this work because I'm continuing with this, and I'm actually, it's just that there's so much there that I keep rewriting this the first part in accordance to the with the later parts. So part of what I'm trying to do is trying to figure out what the theme of the Russian verb is, and this talk is more or less about that. Since most of the audience are native Russian speakers and Russian native speakers and have studied all this stuff in school, I will be very brief. As you guys know, between the lexical stem and the tense agreement morphology, there can appear some functional material, and the most mysterious of them is a suffix, usually a vocalic suffix, that appears just before tense. Some verbs do not have anything like this, like the verb to climb, but most verbs do. And tradition allows for at least the 7 suffixes that are listed in 4. And the general understanding is, or has been until relatively recently, that these suffixes do not contribute anything semantic. This is especially true for the work that has been done on Romance languages, and also for I guess there's been some work done on Greek as well. But recently there has been a resurgence of interest in the verbal theme, and the attempt to argue that these suffixes in particular, are associated with some meaning. So I'm listing some work in the beginning that says no, they don't have any semantics, and there's been some recent work. I'm summarizing only the most recent work on the topic that is trying to argue that the verbal theme, these vowels in Romance languages and also in Slavic languages, correspond to the little v of Moran's 1984. The little v has been much studied in syntax and in morphology, and there's 2 major beliefs about what it may do. Or so one belief is that it introduces the event argument of the verb, the situational argument. The other one is that it introduces the external argument. And the third one is that there's actually 2 of these suffixes, little v and the voice. One of them introduces the event argument and the other one introduces the external argument. And people doing work on this topic usually talk about little v, and it's not 100% clear sometimes which of these hypotheses they have in mind. So what I'm going to try to do now is to look at nominalizations in Russian. Russian is an extremely morphologically rich language. And it has nominalizations that include the thematic vowels and those that do not include the thematic vowel. Okay, and I'm going to try and figure out if the presence of the thematic vowel influences the interpretation of the resulting nominal. So as some of you know, I do have a position about the interpretation about these thematic suffixes, but I'm really going to try to abstract away from it, not mention any of my previous thoughts on the matter. I really want to look at this from scratch, right? So let's not have any hypothesis in the beginning. So there are two clear morphological distinctions that are shown by nominalizing suffixes that I'm going to look at. One of them is the presence or absence of a theme suffix, and the other one is categorical sensitivity. Some set of suffixes only combine with verbs, and others are category neutral. So one of the things that I'm going to look at, and this is not the main topic of interest of this talk, but still very interesting, is the question of whether the two properties coincide. And the spoiler is no, they don't. So I ended up having a very long handout. So I think I'm going to do only half of it eventually. And the other half, you're welcome to peruse at your own leisure if you want to. I'm going to mostly talk about the so-called adjunctive nominalization, nominactoris, ER nominalizations, because they are the most interesting. The ING nominalizations have been studied a lot more. There's a lot more to say about this, to quote about them, really. But basically, they show the same thing as ER nominalizations. And eventually, what I'm going to arrive at is, weirdly enough, the thematic suffix does seem to contribute something meaningful, but it's not yet clear what. Before we continue, one thing that I want to do is give you a very brief introduction into Russian phonology for those of you that have not seen this before. Russian doesn't like hiatus. Russian doesn't like a sequence of two vowels. So if you have a sequence of two vowels, it's very often the case. So if the stem ends in a vowel and the suffix begins with a vowel, the first vowel usually disappears in one way or the other. So this creates a problem when you have a theme that is a vowel itself or ends in a vowel. So we have so there is a way of detecting whether the theme is there or not by looking at what happens with the preceding consonant. This does not work for all themes. This only works for the theme E. What it does, or the theme E, like in the verb to see. So what happens with this theme, either with this element E or with this element E, when it appears before a vocalic suffix, is it turns into a glide. And after it has turned into a glide, it changes the consonant that precedes it. So if you had a D, for instance, then you will end up with Z. And if you have a B, as in любить, you will end up with bl, as in люблю. So this is a way of finding out whether the verbal theme has been there to begin with, right? So I'm mentioning this so that you know, when I say this particular suffix doesn't have a theme, does not introduce a theme, it's because I have checked it with the appropriate verbs where you would see the appropriate phonology. Okay, so what I'm going to look at is the adjunctive nominalization. Adjunctive is a misnomer, but basically it's the nominalization that targets the external argument of the verb. There's only one such suffix in Russian. It's the suffix tel. It is very productive. There's many asymmetric suffixes that give rise to nominals with similar semantics, and at least one of them, the suffix chic, is both productive and purely adjunctive. So here I give two examples with the same verbal root. Maybe even not a verbal, sorry, no, it used to be a nominal root, it becomes a verbal stem here. And you can see that it can create a tail noun and it can create a chic noun. The choice between the two patterns is stem-based, so you look at the combination of the stem and the prefix, and then you decide. Sometimes both are possible, so it's not impossible that the same verb would create several adjunctive nouns with slightly different interpretations. Adjunctive nouns are a lot less studied than event nominalizations, those that are like ing nominalizations. But there's been some work on this. What you need to take home from all of this. So, okay, so there's a lot of literature here. The main division that people have been interested in, so basically there's two. One is whether the resulting noun is eventive. So whether it implies the presence of an event that the verb names. So for instance, читатель, does читатель imply that there has been an event of reading? The second important point is whether the noun in question allows a complement. So for instance, читатель probably does, and выключатель is more problematic about this. And if you read all these works, you will discover that most of stuff that they mostly agree on the point that animate nouns denoting participants in a particular situation, so those that actually have a complement, contain a lot of verbal material. Those that do not, so dispositional adjunctive nouns like professions, teacher, or instruments like printer, may have less information, may have less verbal material. And so people sort of started with there's less material in dispositional ER nominals, and there's more in eventive ones, so those that have the full argument structure and have a complement. But later they shifted to the hypothesis that both of them actually have the same amount of structure. And this is what we will also see for Russian. And the difference is just on the interpretational level. People have also noted for English that the ER suffix creates a lot of things that are not nominalizations of the external argument. So you have something like scratcher. So this is a lottery ticket that is scratched, or even a scrambler, which is apparently a dish of scrambled eggs. They can create locations like diner. They can create objects that are used while participating in a particular activity, like loafer. They can be completely weird, like sneakers, and they can be non-deverbal. And this is mostly not relevant for us here. But it introduces the option of deriving ER nominals from non-verbal stems, which some people use in their research. And we will not look at this either, because at this point it is not relevant for us. But because there's so many Russian suffixes creating adjunctive nominals, most of the hypotheses listed here, many of the hypotheses listed here can be tested on Russian, but cannot be tested on English. And I will not even begin doing this. What is of most interest to us is the work by Tatiana Marvin on the suffix lets, which is the Slovenian adjunctive suffix, and basically what she says might be relevant for the semantic analysis of adjunctive nominals that I will not attempt to do here, but it's Slavic, so it is it is closer to what we're interested in than most of it. Okay, so I will start with the theme retaining adjunctive nominalization in TEL. It is much more restricted than the English ER nominalization in that it allows agents or instruments. To the best of my knowledge, there are no patients or locations or facilitating instruments used with that are derived with TEL, but I mean, I can be mistaken. It's very difficult to prove non-existence of something. This suffix does not apply to anything that is not a verb. There are some weird cases like this one, dождеватель. I mean, this is the only time this was my first time of seeing this word, but to the extent that it is possible, you can see that it contains a sort of a missing step, that there has to be a verb in there because it has this verbal suffix ev or ov, and then it has the theme a. So it's not an exception. It's just one of those derivations where you have a missing step. And I'm not going to talk about the missing steps, even though this is a very interesting topic. So it can create agents or instruments like преобразователь. It can create pure instruments. It can create pure agents that do not have instrumental interpretation. And what is interesting is that the argument structure of the base, so the indirect object remains, the direct object remains. However, the case, if it gets quirky case, like instrumental or dative, this quirky case is lost. And this probably says something about the internal structure of these items, and in the sense that if you believe in many flavors of the little v, and the little v that assigns a particular quirky case, then for some reason that those weird little v's disappear in here. Not altogether completely. I know of one exception, but generally this is the case. If you remember, I did not talk very much about the distinctions between eventive and non-eventive interpretations of adjunctive nominals, but in general, people have noted that if you have a non-specific interpretation, a mass noun or what corresponds to a bare plural in English, then you can still retain the instrument interpretation. So for instance, this is amazingly, this is a liquid, okay? It's a chemical of some sort. I didn't know that, I just looked it up. So a Rust transformer, преобразователь ржавчины, is still an instrument of sorts. This is not a person. But преобразователь нашего Отечества, again, I'm sorry for this example, but I wanted the corpus example in this situation. This is a person, or an agent assimilated to a person, like some organization. It's definitely not a profession in any way. The profession преподаватель, when combined with a non-specific complement, stops so much being a profession and becomes something like an agent of the action described by the verb. So for instance, the преподаватель курса «Островные ограничения» does not have to be a professional lecturer. It's just enough that they will be able to deliver this course. What is important for us here is that the basic two distinctions that have been discussed for the English ER nominals are the ability to take a complement, including a specific complement, and the ability to be interpreted as the participant in a situation described by the verb. They're both there. Okay, so this is what we would expect, because a verb containing a theme is the longest form of the verb that you can have. Everything else, if you remove the theme, it would already be smaller. Both inner aspect prefixes and the secondary imperfective suffix can also be present in tail nouns. This also shows that they have a pretty big structure. The contribution of the secondary imperfective suffix is unclear. Right? This is also known for ing nominals, of course. It seems that its presence or absence really depends on the stem. Usually, it depends on the root. So usually, tail nouns formed from the same root have either have the secondary imperfective suffix in tail nominalization, or they don't. But sometimes there are exceptions. So for the root da, to give, we have преподаватель, which contains the secondary imperfective morphology in a way. And we also have предатель, which doesn't. This may have something to do with the fact that for this verb, the non-imperfective stem is archaic. Sometimes the verb has no imperfective stem at all, like in 14a. Завещатель, there's no завестить, so there's no possibility of having завеститель. But предвозвеститель is there, derived from the other stem. It does not seem to be the case that the semantics of the verb or the phonology of the verb plays any role in the choice. I mean, I have not investigated this matter, of course. Usually it's either one or the other. I have found one situation where both were possible, and this is уловитель versus улавливатель. There doesn't seem to be a difference in interpretation. These two nouns, this might simply be a matter of individual choice. Okay. Okay, so summarizing, right, and there's one more thing. Of course, you can get, of course, usually you get semantically transparent interpretations. Sometimes they're less transparent, like выключатель is not a thing that only turns things off, it's also the thing that turns things on. But generally, the interpretation is very transparent. There are some exceptions, but they're rare. This is a very recent, chronologically very recent derivational suffix. Many Slavic languages don't have it at all. So it's not surprising that it is very transparent. So summarizing, what is relevant for us here is that this is a purely deverbal suffix. It obligatorily retains the theme. It may contain inner aspect prefixes and the secondary imperfective suffix, so some higher morphology than just little v. What the role of the secondary imperfective suffix is unclear. The quirky case assignment is lost in agentive formation, not always, but very often. As I said, there are some exceptions, and there's a mention of one such exception in the chat I just noticed. And the resulting interpretation can be eventive or non-eventive, and the resulting noun may take a genitive complement or fail to do so, and that genitive complement may be specific or it may be non-specific. So the full range of facts that have been attested for ER nominalizations are also present for tail nominalizations. And in addition, you can also see in them the clear presence of lexical aspect and the secondary imperfective suffix. Okay, so this is what we would expect. We expect a bigger chunk of the structure once you have a C. Just a second, I'll look what is there in the chat. Okay, thanks. I will, yeah. So if you want to interrupt me, if you want to ask something, you speak, because I don't always look at the chat. Okay, and now I want to look at theme lacking suffixes. There's lots more of them. And as I said before, they have two properties. Well, they have usually have one more property that is concurrent with them not having a theme. They're very often category neutral, so they have a broader distribution. Here's several examples. The suffix its is category neutral. It can derive nouns from adjectives, from verbs, from nouns even, and it can form deverbal nominals that do not correspond to agents or instruments. So while продавец is completely normal, it's like the person who sells something, a seller, and so is резец. There's also more exotic cases like рубец or поставец, which are derived from verbal roots, but do not denote entities performing the action described by the verb. And these are still sufficiently transparent to be able to be sure that this is not completely idiosyncratic. And since we're already talking about this, if you look at 18C and D, you can see that the final consonant of the stem, B here and V here, has remained intact. It has not turned into рублец or поставлец, which means that the theme is not here for sure. Right, so this suffix definitely does not have a hidden theme underneath it, or at least, right, or at least when we come to the theme E, the second conjugation theme E, that one is not there. Both eventive and non-eventive interpretations are possible, and quirky case can be retained. As I said before, this is kind of rare. So you can have торговец редкими книгами, which retains the quirky case, and you can have a specific complement forcing the eventive interpretation, the person who is doing the action denoted by the verb to the entity denoted by its complement. So it has exactly the same interpretations that are available for tail nouns, despite the fact that it does not have the theme. It's an old suffix. It is not very productive with verbs by themselves, but it's quite productive in compounds. There's also, just a second, I see. Right, I totally agree, yes. Sorry about the comment about calques from Greek. Yeah, I totally agree. There's a more recent suffix, chic. I'm not looking at all of them. I'm just looking at some of them because what I'm interested in is, as I said, does the presence of the theme lead to a change in semantics? And to check this point, it's enough really to look at two suffixes. And I'm going to look at a few more because then we will see some more interesting stuff about these suffixes. So the suffix chic is more recent. It has a more restricted semantic, slightly more restricted semantics, in the sense that even when it applies to non-verbal stems, it still preferentially derives professions, so workers or specialists in the field determined by the stem, or instruments. So if you look at 21, you see a profession here, упаковщик or фрезеровщик, and it can have the instrument interpretation as entrальщик or бомбардировщик. These are slightly more rare, but still available. Well, slightly, actually more. When I looked at Залезняк and I was looking for nouns derived with the suffix, most of them are animate. This suffix also allows us to use to introduce a complement. So both in the professional interpretation, so in what is known as a dispositional or functional reading, as in a food supplier, but also in an noneventive interpretation, as in 23b. This is also a corpus example. I just really liked it too. Obviously, this does not have to be. This is not a profession, right? It could the packer could have been just about anyone. Okay, so once again, we're seeing that despite the absence of a theme, the suffix still creates the same range of meanings as the tel suffix. I will not try to show to you the fact that, but you can believe me on that, this one also does not, one does not contain the theme. We would have expected vocalic changes in the final consonant of the stem if it had. Okay. So so far we have seen two suffixes that are both athematic and category neutral. So the obvious question is whether these two properties go hand in hand. The answer is no. So there is at least one suffix that is strictly deverbal and yet athematic. So there is a suffix that requires verbs and yet does not combine with a theme. This is the suffix un, and it is not very frequent, but still productive, as demonstrated by the existence of the noun nesun, created in Soviet times already. It is strictly deverbal. There's one exception. And it also creates agents or instruments, and it is athematic. So we see this from examples like говорун. This is not говорюн, which is what we would expect if there were if the theme were there. So one thing that we see right away is that you can be a verb, or a stem can be verbal without there being a theme. A suffix that only combines with verbs does not apply on top of the theme, which means that those stems have something on them that already says we are verbal. Okay, this is one important result that we get here. So whatever the theme does, it does not create verbs. For me, this is a very welcome result. I'm kind of very glad that we're getting this independently of all other diagnostics. Okay, just a second. Comment in the chat. Oh yes, right. Thank you. That's absolutely perfect. Another productive formation. Okay, so I will summarize very briefly what I have said so far. There doesn't seem to be any detectable semantic difference between agentive nominals derived with a theme and without a theme. In fact, I have this nice minimal pair here, like продавец and покупатель are really mirror images of each other. It's the same situation, the same, right? And both verbs are underlyingly Perfective, both are formed with secondary imperfective, well, not second, yeah, secondary imperfective roots, and this is one of those very few cases where, right, so this is what I haven't mentioned and I should have mentioned, and I'll mention it in a moment, sorry. But anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that this is a presumably non-semantic suffix. This is a semantic suffix, and nevertheless, they have exactly the same properties. I now realize that what I haven't mentioned before, and I should have mentioned, is that asymmetric nominals cannot be formed from secondary imperfectives in live. So this is a major difference between the two classes, and I haven't highlighted it here, but I should have. These asymmetric suffixes do not apply on top of the secondary imperfective. The verbs, the verb here, продавать is might be a secondary imperfective or might not. I mean, people differ as to whether it is derived in the same way as regular secondary imperfectives, but that one is an exception. A verb that contains the -iv suffix cannot form an adjunctive nominal with these asymmetric suffixes, right? And this is general for both ER nouns and ing nouns. The moment you have a secondary imperfective suffix, the -iv suffix, you cannot form an asymmetric nominal. Okay. What I have not, just let me check for a second. I think I have, no, actually, I'm sorry. I have missed this this part and have not mentioned, have not talked about the fact that the secondary imperfectives are not possible for adjunctive nominals, for asymmetric adjunctive nominals. You just have to trust me on this. And look at the one of the further sections where I discuss this matter for ing nominals. However, the reason why I'm not going to be talking about ing nominals now, and I'm going to continue talking about ER nominals, is there is a very interesting fact about these nominals. That is, they can be augmented. So these asymmetric suffixes, chic and ets and the feminine ka can also be augmented with the suffix l. So when I stumbled upon this generalization in this discussion in Pike in 2003, she says stems that cannot take the suffix chic for phonological reasons use the suffix l-chic. So like with the verb сушить, you cannot say сушик, so you have to say сушильщик. Now, weirdly enough, this is definitely not about phonology. And this l or l, as it is surfaces here, is far from innocent. So one, it corresponds, it's very similar to the past tense suffix. Yeah, and this is in fact what I'm going to say it is. It does not seem to be phonologically conditioned, and it requires the presence of the verbal theme. So there's a lot of verbs. So here I give a list. Here I give some examples to show that this is not about phonology. So the root bol, pain, and the root small, tar, have very similar phonology. One of them and nevertheless they can have, you can have болельщик, you can have смолильщик, but you can also have смольщик. This is all checked in Zalizniak. Apparently, this is again the lexical choice. You can use one or you can use the other, and as you can see, the presence of the theme correlated to the presence of the l augment does not seem to affect the interpretation. Or yeah, it does in a way because the augmented form is contemporarily, I think, more productive than the non-augmented form. Once we have noticed this, we realize that the nominalizing suffix "-nik" also has this "-lnik" variant, and the suffix "-ets" also has the "l" variant, and the suffix "k" also has the "lk" variant, and even the non-productive place denoting suffix "n" also has the "l" "ln" variant. Here's some examples. Showing that they all have this additional variant, and sometimes this additional variant is more productive. Recently, yeah. So this augment is in fact the ancient active past participle suffix. It's current past tense suffix, or at least I would be very surprised. I would be very interested to hear an alternative hypothesis. Of course, it might be that what we have been calling the active past participle suffix and what we are calling the current past tense suffix actually do something else, and the semantics of the active past participle and ancient active past participle and the semantics of the current past tense comes from somewhere else. But this is a hypothesis to develop. What we're saying right now is that this augment seems to be identical to the one used in past tense suffix. And what is interesting about the past tense suffix is that it does not have person, so it's not marked for person features. Maybe this is relevant, maybe this is not. There doesn't seem to be any semantic difference between the two. I would not call them allomorphs between the augmented and non-augmented versions of the same suffix. But as a result, the use of secondary imperfective stems becomes possible. Right, so here are some examples. So what these examples suggest is that if you have introduced, if you want to use the theme, so if you take a verb that contains a theme and you want to nominalize it, then before you can nominalize it, you should add something, an additional suffix that does something else. So this L augment is correlated with the presence of the theme. If you're using those non-semantic suffixes and you want to take a verb with a theme, then you have to do something to level out the effect of the theme, which, as I said, strongly suggests that the theme actually does something. It has some semantics that requires one to do something extra before you can use the suffixes "nik," "chic," and "k." Okay. One can, of course, try to argue this is pure phonology. I won't, because this is not an interesting hypothesis to begin with. It would just say that L is completely accidental, but also because there's another augment around that I haven't looked at. I just noticed this when I was printing out this handout. There's the augment "n," which seems to do something similar, but I'm not sure. No, so agranka is a wrong one. Sorry, but sodержанка is fine. Okay, so summarizing what I have said so far, we have ER nouns in Russian, which allow for the same range of interpretations, deverbal interpretations, as English ER suffix does. Irrespective of the presence of the theme, you can get both eventive and non-eventive interpretations, and irrespective of the presence of the theme, you can get a specific or non-specific complement. So it does not seem to be the case that the presence of the theme is necessary to create a verb. However, once we have looked at the augmented asymmetric suffixes, we have discovered that the presence of a theme actually requires the presence of an additional suffix before nominalization, which suggests that the theme does have some semantic contribution. Contrary to the previous hypothesis, the earlier hypothesis that said that it does not do anything at all. It is now, I have been talking for an hour. So what I can do now, I can either continue with discussing event result nominalizations, which show a similar thing, or I can take a break and ask and answer questions. What do you prefer, guys? Silence.
It's not entirely clear. What would you like to do?
Well, I would probably like to continue, but I'm just afraid of running over time. Because as you can see, I am on page 8, and the handout is 50. The real handout is about 15 pages long.
It's okay. We have all the time in the world.
Okay. I think once again, everybody who's putting stuff in the chat, I will look at. I will look at it later and try to answer it later. Okay. We can now look at the event result nominalizations, which are a lot better studied. And Sergey there is one of the world experts on this, if not the one. What I'm going as a spoiler, obviously, I'm going to show that both thematic and asymmetric ing nominalizations in Russian seem to give seem to create the same range of meanings, and the presence of a theme does not seem to correspond with any improvement, any additional semantics that is not available when the theme is not there. In 22 and 23, I give an example. I give examples of thematic nominalization, and then 33b is asymmetric nominalization. In this case, I took the same verbal stem with slightly different interpretations, but and as expected, normally one stem gives you either one or the other, but there are cases where both are possible. So штрихование versus штриховка, both are possible. The difference is that in штрихование you do not get the result interpretations. So штриховка can denote the result of applying the activity of hatching, while штрихование doesn't. But this might be accidental. I have not researched this topic at all. The divisions between the pattern 32 and 33 are very similar to what has been observed for event nominals in English. There's the super productive pattern in ing, drawing, speaking, etc. And then there's a host of less productive patterns like all in arrival, age in stowage, etc. Meant in concealment, and so on and so forth. As I said, there does not seem to be any difference in the range of meanings available to deverbal nominalizations, irrespective of the presence of the theme. Okay, what is particularly interesting in the context of what I have been mentioning before is the fact that the most productive pattern of developing event nouns in Russian is actually morphologically complex. So it consists of two pieces. This is the past participle suffix, and this is a general nominalizing suffix. This has been noted by a lot of people before. I am unfortunately more familiar with the English language literature on this, but I'm sure this has also been discussed a lot in Russian-speaking literature. So do throw those references at me. I will definitely look at them. It is easy to see if you look at the verbs that take the past participle suffix t, like открыть, which is открыто, and you immediately see that the deverbal noun is открытие, not открыние. I don't know. Yeah, you have откровение, but that's not normal formation. Okay, the allomorphy between the two of the passive participle suffix is determined phonologically, but not derived by regular phonological rules. People who have looked at this, namely Ellen Babi and Alla Pazelskaya and Sergei Tatyavosov, have all have agreed that what happens is that you have a two-step formation. First, you create some sort of a nominal. So in Babi's terms, so in Babi's terms, you first go from something that is plus v to something that is minus v, and then you specify whether this is how nominal it is, whether it is an adjectival nominal, a nominal that is adjectival, or whether this is a nominal that is nouny. Like in Russian, we actually have this. You can say имя существительное, имя прилагательное. The distribution of the three, okay, I'm sorry, I went too fast. ING nominals in English have been argued to have three readings. Complex event reading, diagnosed by the presence of internal arguments. The simple event reading that does not have internal arguments, and the result interpretation, which does not involve an event, but gives you the result of a particular event. And there's been a lot of literature arguing back and forth about whether these readings are the same readings, which readings should be distinguished from which readings, whether the presence of argument structure actually gives you something important, whether the simple event reading and the complex event readings are the same thing. It's not important for us, really. What is important is that when people have argued that this reading is there, like the complex event reading, or this those nominals have it. So if you take something like писание, this has the result interpretation, or it can have the complex event interpretation when you're talking about the writing of something by someone. And кипячение does not have a result interpretation, but it does have the event interpretations, etc., etc., etc. So the range of meanings that you would expect from ING nominals are all tested in Russian ING nominals. This is a very productive suffix, or sorry, suffixal complex. I don't know how to call it. Sometimes the resulting interpretations are idiosyncratic, which is what you expect from any morphological formation. From the point of view of the structure, as we noticed before for ER nominals, the presence of the theme makes it possible for us to have the secondary imperfective suffix. And actions prefixes, so interlexical prefixes are available as well. So you can have открывание, you can have распечатывание. The secondary imperfective prefix suffix is there. Once again, it is not 100%. It's not clear. At least it's not clear to me at all what the contribution of the suffix is in these nominals. It has been noticed by Micas Horlemer that when you have the secondary imperfective suffix, then you must have an event reading. You cannot have a result interpretation. But Horlemer also lists some exceptions like всхлипывание or высказывание. Summarizing what is relevant for us in thematic ing nouns, a given noun formed by this complex can have a complex event reading, a simple event reading, or a result reading, or a combination of the three, just like for the English ing. They can have idiosyncratic interpretations. Those are generally those are non-eventive. But yeah, maybe some of them are eventive. I don't know whether this is important or not. I don't think there's any prediction made one way or the other anyway. Secondary imperfectives are possible, but whether they contribute any kind of a spectral interpretation is not clear. The suffix is purely deverbal and obligatorily retains the theme. So the theme must be there, it cannot disappear. This is a very regular and very productive and mostly predictable formation. So as expected, no surprises here. What might be a surprise and probably shouldn't be given how much this topic has been worked on is the fact that other deverbal nominalizations, those that lack the theme, and I think all the rest of them lack the theme. But again, I haven't checked this in detail, but all of them seem to have the same variety of interpretations available to them. And the only difference is the same as before, the impossibility of having the secondary imperfective. So very briefly, asymmetric ing nominalizations can be formed with a lot of suffixes. Some of these suffixes are most of these suffixes are category neutral, so they're not purely deverbal. So for instance, the suffix tv creates at least one asymmetric ing nominalization производство, which has all the range of the entire range of interpretations available to ing nominals. But it's clearly non-deverbal, and it creates a range of different meanings. The suffix k, which also creates nomina actionis, can be a diminutive, a feminizer, and the adjectival nominalizer, a generic nominalizer. This is the most beautiful. These are the most beautiful cases, I think, of this formation. There's also what is known as conversion or derivation by truncation, which is a hugely interesting topic of its own, and I'm not going to touch upon it at all. The point is, there's a lot of them. They do not involve the theme, and however, they have both event and result interpretations. So all the interpretations that are available to ing nominals formed with the passive past participle suffix are also available to these non-thematic nominals as illustrated in 44. You can have the result and event nominal interpretation. You can have the event nominal interpretation without a result. You can have a purely result interpretation. And this has been independently demonstrated by both. So Micas Horlemer, when she worked on this, basically treated them indifferently, and Alla Pazovskaya in her corpus work has carefully examined the range of interpretations available to the passive past participle E sequence, and also to K nominals and truncation-derived nominals, and she concluded that they have the same range of interpretations. But there are preferences, as in what she says is that null-derived nominations are mildly preferentially intransitive, but for most properties, you can surely find the asymmetric nominal having these properties as well. Such nouns can contain verbal prefixes, as discussed before, but they cannot contain secondary imperfective suffixes. Again, I am summarizing. They can have non-semantic deverbal nominals, can have the same range of interpretations as semantic nominals. They also can have idiosyncratic interpretations. They cannot contain secondary imperfective suffixes, but they can contain interlexical prefixes. None of these suffixes seem to be purely deverbal or can retain the theme. I know of one potential example. Oh, sorry, just a second. Let me check if I put it here or I haven't put it in at all. Yeah, I have. Right. So I'll repeat this again. I tried to do a comparison by looking at two types of nominals derived from the same stem. It is, I think it is not it cannot be predicted which range of interpretations will be available to which nominals. It is generally the case that the nominals derived with the sequence of a passive past participle suffix and e have the process reading. So if you both are available, then this kind of nominal will have the process reading. The other nominal may have the result interpretation, may have both a result and process interpretation, or it may have, I don't think it is possible that the this kind of nominal will have the result interpretation only, and this one would have the process interpretation. But maybe this is just, I haven't found such examples. Because as I said, by itself, when there's no contrast, ka nominals can have the process interpretation by themselves. We'll see this here. And these nominals can have the pure result interpretation. Okay, from the point of view of argument structure, the presence of inner aspect, the event/result interpretations, the two types of deverbal nouns do not seem to differ. So whether there is a theme there or there isn't a theme there, you get the same outcome in the end. The main, and I think only difference, is that only the semantic nominalization can contain the secondary imperfective suffix. But as I mentioned before, it is not clear that the secondary imperfective suffix introduces any additional meaning that is not available outside of it. It's an open question what that suffix does in these nominalizations. Asymmetric suffixes, as I said, are category neutral. But maybe there is one asymmetric suffix that is purely deverbal and not category, that is asymmetric and purely deverbal. It's probably the suffix b, as in kasba. But it is not productive. Two, it has some weird examples, like it has svadьба and it has galijba. I don't know whether this is the same thing or not. So I would not I would not base any generalizations on this. It is enough that we already know that there is at least one purely deverbal suffix that does not contain the theme. That was the suffix un. Okay, the fact that so just to summarize once again, the presence or absence of the theme vowel does not seem to affect the resultant interpretation of the event nominal. But the fact that the passive past participle sequence is complex correlates with what we have observed with the augmental law, right? So you can try to say something like, look, this semantic formation actually consists of two parts. We have already seen this. One is the suffix that we're calling the passive past participle suffix. The other one is just a nominalizing suffix e. We know that the suffix exists independently. So it seems, once again, that in order to create a nominal from a semantic verb, you first have to do something to it. And it is interesting that in both situations, what you're doing, you're using a morpheme that creates or used to create participles. So yeah. And then the question, of course, is, so what happens with the suffix tel? Well, the simple answer would be, okay, suppose that when we have a semantic stem, we need to do something to it before we combine it with a generic nominalizing suffix. Okay, fine. But maybe when we're dealing with a non-generic nominalizing suffix like tel, which is only deverbal, maybe the two functions, the one performed by the passive past participle morphology in ing nouns and the one performed by l in augmented adjunctive nominals, maybe this function is combined in the suffix tel with the function that creates an adjunctive nominal. So it's not a problem that the same suffix does two things as opposed to one. I have also considered the possibility that tel nouns are derived from infinitives, which would yield the generalization that you really have to do, you make your verb non-finite before you can nominalize it in some way. On the one hand, there seems to be a little bit of evidence in favor of this. I looked at two verbs that have weird infinitives, not the infinitives on t, but the infinitives on t. And among these verbs, there's two that create something similar to tel nominalizations, and lo and behold, they contain the infinitive form. So you say blüstitel, not blüditel, or whatever it would be, blütel, and you say rastitelny. However, then I decided to look at second conjugation verbs in e, and then I was surprised, and I found to find out that what happens there is actually that you do not retain the theme of the infinitive, right? So you have zret, to behold, but the tel nominalization from this is zritel, not zretel, and you have smatritel and not smatretel. So the hypothesis that you create an infinitive and then you add the tel suffix does not seem to be correct. So at this point, I am inclined to say that the suffix tel does two things at once. Whatever is necessary to go from a verb to a nominal, and then whatever is necessary to go from a nominal to the adjunctive noun. But again, since we don't know what it is that the augments do, the question is open for discussion. So summarizing, theme-lacking nominals do not seem to be semantically different from, oh, sorry, I said this twice, from thematic nominals in areas where they intersect. I say in areas where they intersect because athematic suffixes have a much wider range of interpretations available to them. So you get the core interpretations of agent and instrument and event versus result. The eventive interpretations for both ing nominals and er nominals are there. The presence of internal argument structure seems to be there for both categories. The possibility of having inner aspect prefixes is there for both of them. The difference is that asymmetric nominals cannot be formed from secondary imperfectives, but this does not seem to be a semantic difference. There seem to be, in general, three types of deverbal nominalization in Russian. So one type is purely deverbal suffixes like tel, which is and the complex event suffix, which both attach on top of theme, and the suffix un, which doesn't. And this shows, as I said before, in addition to the semantic argument that I have been trying to develop here, this shows that the theme does not create the verb. So the verb is created before the theme is added. Whatever the theme does, it's not create the verb. There are non-categorizing suffixes, which are not general purpose nominalizers with vague semantics, or really just adjunctive suffixes, nick, chic, and ets. And there's mixed nominalization, which is the combination of those adjunctive suffixes with an augment. So semantic normalizations contain more material, but the resulting range of meanings is the same. What seems to emerge as the full picture is that the presence of a theme suffix necessitates necessitates an additional semantic operation, which we don't know we don't know what the theme does, and we don't know what the additional suffix does, but they seem to go hand in hand. Finally, I don't think there's any reason to believe that the theme introduces the event argument or the external argument, at least, or if it does this, there's no evidence from nominalizations for this hypothesis. There's a ton of stuff that I would still want to look at, but since this is very much work in progress, I only leave this as questions for future work. Thanks a lot.
Так, где тут аплодисменты? Реакции. Так, во. Дорогие коллеги, время для обсуждения вопросов, комментариев, горячих споров. Пожалуйста, кто хотел бы задать вопрос. Так, я вижу Петину руку. Ну, обычно мы вопросы задаем через чат или вот поднимаем руку методом собственно, поднятия руки. Вот я пока вижу сейчас только Петину руку. Петь, наверное, можно тогда уже и задавать.
Да, спасибо большое. Если можно, я задам вопрос по-русски. Спасибо огромное, Ора. Это, как всегда, ужасно интересно и сразу побуждает к огромному количеству разных мыслей. Но у меня на самом деле не столько вопрос, сколько вот как раз некая, если угодно, методологическая добавка к твоим дальнейшим further questions. Я думаю, что имело бы смысл попытаться, я даже не знаю, как это правильно сказать.
Ясно, прямо.
Да, нет, я имею в виду какую тут употребить терминологию. В общем, я имею в виду вот что во всем этом на самом деле очень много диахронии. И И вопрос в том, каким способом ее учесть. Один способ ее учесть, который я теоретически вижу, состоит в том, чтобы, например, попытаться выкинуть из этого материала все, что имеет хотя бы малейшее подозрение на то, что это, допустим, что это слово возникло, условно говоря, 600 лет назад или еще больше, когда морфология была немножко другая, и какие-то другие вещи были продуктивные, или, не знаю, когда глагол «смотреть» был не «смотреть», а «смотреть» и тому подобное. Потому что это в каком-то смысле это все некий мусор, прошу прощения, который затемняет картину, ну вот, так сказать, действительно синхронной деривации, которая вот она сейчас, так сказать, в головах, сейчас работает и каким-то способом находится в голове носителей, помимо каких-то вещей, которые, ну вот, так сказать, выучены и все. С другой стороны, разумеется, все эти более старые модели, они тоже влияют как-то на то, что происходит в синхронии, и, возможно, отфильтровать их целиком было бы неправильно, но, возможно, имеет смысл как-то это все больше контролировать, наверное. Вот.
Я не сомневаюсь, что ты совершенно прав в этом деле. Вопрос в том, как ты сам сказал, нет возможности решить это дело до того, как возникла какая-то гипотеза. Все, что идиоматично, все, что необычно, в итоге можно списать на это диахрония. Но это можно делать, мне кажется, только тогда, когда ты уже знаешь, что происходит примерно, и ты ждешь, so these are the predictions, these are the exceptions. Can the exceptions be explained by diachronic development? Yes, they probably can. They always can. But if you throw all of them out at this point, right? So so take the examples with настоятель or with смотритель. Obviously, these are not normal derivations. But does the contemporary speaker know that these nouns are derived from these verbs? Well, I think they do. So somewhere in their mind, they must have this derivational link. Since what I'm trying to do is trying to see what's in the head of a contemporary speaker, I at least need to think about these in the beginning. When I have when we have situations like предатель or преподаватель, the fact that both are available probably says very little, if anything, because they are weird formations. So at this point, my take on these things is I note them, I keep them in mind. I don't want to draw any conclusions from them. What I would be trying to check is whether when I have a hypothesis, I would try to see whether these can be derived or they have to be explained away. But at best, I think they could be supporting evidence, or but they cannot be counter evidence. Right? So this is probably how I would feel about them.
А можно еще вопрос?
А есть ли еще вопросы? Пока нет еще вопросов.
Там были вопросы в чате. по-моему.
А ты на них не то чтобы уже ответила. Но мне кажется, пусть Петя задаст еще один вопрос, а мы сейчас быстро пролистаем чат тем временем.
Да, я хотел, если можно, задать еще один вопрос. Я на самом деле прекрасно понимаю, почему ты смотришь только на русский. И в каком-то смысле, если бы я был на твоем месте, я бы тоже смотрел только на русский. Но с другой стороны, не думаешь ли ты, что если всю вот эту вот логику и методологию применить заодно к другим славянским языкам, может быть, не в одиночку, а вместе с кем-то, то это дало бы еще более интересные и какие-то еще более убедительные результаты. Потому что русский язык на самом деле среди славянских довольно специфический, особенно в области номинализаций. В других славянских языках это может быть, например, более регулярно. И, в общем, возможно, и собственно, если идет вопрос о роли, если вопрос стоит в том, какова роль вот этих вот тематических элементов в глаголе, то, коль скоро эти элементы, они общие для всех славянских языков, то, соответственно, то и данные всех славянских языков могут на этот вопрос вместе ответить более полно и убедительно. Вот.
Да, если ты посмотришь на первой странице handout, то там есть ссылки на работы коллег, которые работают над славянским и сербо-хорватским. И я много смотрю с другой своей коллегой Марьяной Морель на номинализации в сербо-хорватском, чтобы, в общем, ответить, например, на те же вопросы. И одна из вещей, которые я помню, да, это что в них тоже есть augmented nominalizations, что само по себе очень интересно, но глубоко я в это еще не углублялась. Мне пока понять хотя бы, на что смотреть. Пока что, как я сказала, здесь в этом докладе вопрос, который я себе задаю, это вот на что влияет наличие тематического суффикса. И можно ли из этого сделать какие-то выводы? Да, не знаю. Это только русский, да, я согласна.
Так, в чате, надо сказать, вопросы в основном тоже Петины. Значит, если не Петины...
За что я Пете очень благодарна. Я сохранила себе чат.
Вот, но есть комментарии, в общем, я не знаю, надо ли на них отвечать. Мария Егорова пишет: подражатель loves dative objects in the corpus. Наверное, да, там подражатель Пушкина, да. Так, Иннокентий Смирнов пишет: спаситель have a difference. Илья Курьянов пишет: quirky cases often retained in adjective nominalizations in non-standard Russian, I think. Петя Аркадьев. Иннокентий Смирнов: it's strange that we have adjectives like разведывательный. Да, но это в контексте про вторичный имперфектив, да, это как раз та часть доклада.
Or maybe it is about the fact that you can have adjectives that include a lot of missing steps. Like there's no разведыватель.
Да. Так, Илья Курьянов.
Wait, there's a question from... okay, there's a question from Masha.
We're going
through the chat.
Straight back to it, okay. So, but now the chat. Илья Курьянов, how about первооткрыватель?
Там я сначала сказал, потом подумал, ничего интересного про первооткрывателя нет, извините.
Хорошо. Вадим Дьячков.
Есть.
Ungrammatical носчик, but okay, разносчик. Так, Петя Аркадьев. Конец чата. Да, Мария, тогда, если мы дошли до конца чата, мы можем тогда, у нас есть следующая рука. Мария Егорова, пожалуйста.
У меня пока что вопрос, на который я не знаю ответа. Вот насчет подражания, там кому-то их действительно очень много. Я задумалась, есть ли какая-то семантическая разница между случаями, когда у нас допускается только генитив, и случаями, когда допускается quirky case, но я ее пока не вижу. Может быть, она есть? Мне кажется, это можно обдумать.
Да, я вообще сначала думала, что это невозможно. Потом я наткнулась на торговец редкими книгами. Ам, а, Я не знаю, да. Andrew McIntyre, when he's in his work on adjective nominalizations, says that sometimes that some of them behave like compounds, and this in the sense that the first member of a compound cannot take arguments that are projected as part of the entire noun. But there are some exceptions, and maybe this is why he says some ER nominals should be analyzed as compounds. I don't want to comment on whether this is what on the theory itself, but the similarity. This might be a similar point that usually you do not retain the quirky case, but sometimes in exceptional case, I think just something to look at in more detail. Yeah, with владелец, yeah, I agree. Yeah, this most it's usually not there. Yeah, instrumental doesn't seem to. I don't know if there's a difference between instrumentals and datives, because datives can be semantic. And instrumentals here are not. The quirky instrumental is, I don't know if the quirky instrumental is semantic. Yeah. I would be totally happy if somebody looked at this.
Уважаемые коллеги, какие-то есть ли еще вопросы, соображения, комментарии?
References.
Слушай, а можно тогда я спрошу? Ну, то есть это даже не вопрос, такой вот любопытный. Как бы ты в самом начале сказала, что, в принципе, хотела бы вычесть из картинки все предварительные гипотезы о том, что, может быть, тематические элементы неоднородные, да, и начать from scratch. Ну, там, в частности, там некоторые твои же собственные гипотезы есть о том, что они действительно неоднородные, о том, ну, как мы видим, что они неоднородные. Ну, вот, например, твои наблюдения из статьи про вторичный имперфектив о том, что, так сказать, некоторые из них похожи, что под вторичным имперфективом, а некоторые над вторичным имперфективом. Ну, кажется, Вера Грибанова потом в своей статье тоже про это писала. Ну вот, как бы мы сейчас это вычли и смотрели на материал, ну вот так, как будто, так сказать, мы такой возможности не имеем в виду. А вот у тебя уже есть какие-то наблюдения, изменится ли как-то картинка, если вот то, что мы вычли, мы вочтем обратно, да, и будем предполагать, что ну, все-таки у нас есть какие-то намеки на то, что это там есть две, по крайней мере, может быть, разные группы. Да? Может быть, мы тогда увидим ну, какой-то, может быть, какой-то более, например, более отчетливый паттерн, да, или мы увидим какой-то паттерн, в принципе, который раньше не видели. Вот не было у тебя еще никаких на эту тему наблюдений?
Только абсолютный минимум, что, по-моему, продуктивные глаголы на которые de-adjectival, не формируют adjective nominalizations, то есть такой билетель.
Билетель вообще никаких, да?
Да. Ну, мне кажется, да. И опять же, я не проверяла это. Это просто, так сказать, поверхностное наблюдение. И, по-моему, вот imperfectives и вообще и глаголы на «но» это тоже тоже этого не делают. Там прыгнутель или прыгнутие.
Или мокнутель.
Да, или мокнутель. Да, вот вижу в чате кто-то посинение, да. Посинение, покраснение. Это result или event? Да, это был, по-моему, это и
Это,
другое.
наверное, оба. Это,
Да.
наверное, оба, мне кажется.
Вот. Опять же, я не скажу, у меня нет ощущения, что это что-то, по крайней мере, вопроса глаголов на «э», у меня нет ощущения, что это что-то такое глубокое наблюдение, это может быть просто случайность. Да, потому что, как видите, это, то есть, просто номинализация есть, вот типа посинения, да, но вот посинетеля или синетеля просто не существует. Да.
Ага, спасибо. Дорогие друзья, какие еще есть вопросы? Вот Иннокентий Смирнов, да, пожалуйста, Кеш.
Да, благодарю за доклад. Я вот хотел обсудить одно наблюдение из достаточно старой книги Татьяны Вячеславовны Булыгиной 1977 года. Она указывает на то, что в русском языке есть достаточно обширный класс глаголов второго спряжения с инфинитивом на «еть», которые обозначают звучание. Как бы инфинитив может быть понятно на «ате» за фонологию, там кричать, пищать и так далее. И вот эти глаголы очень последовательно образуют номинализации с нулевым суффиксом, там крисп, писк, стук, соответственно, и так далее. Но как бы меня при этом несколько смущает, что как бы, помимо вот таких вот номинализаций, у них бывают еще и стандартные на «ние». Типа, то есть, как бы пищать писк, но жужжать жужжание. Вот.
Я пытаюсь сейчас вспомнить, потому что я в какой-то момент тоже смотрела на эти глаголы, которые вроде как теоретически непродуктивны, но на самом деле в них есть, в этой группе, именно в этой семантической группе есть новые элементы. Мне кажется, что возможность формирования существительных с помощью нулевого суффикса, она в общем, старая, она, в общем, применяется только, она непродуктивна. Она применяется только к старым глаголам. И в данном случае совпадение того, что у нас имеется очень малопродуктивная группа и малопродуктивное образование, наверное, можно объяснить просто синхронией. Я пока не вижу, что из этого следует. Да? То есть все глаголы всех групп могут образовывать и образовывать существительные с нулевым суффиксом или с суффиксом «ане» или «те». Есть ли какое-то еще обобщение относительно этих глаголов, которые, что это показывает? Кроме того, что да, вот такая возможность есть, она присутствует, она используется до сих пор. То есть, она непродуктивна, глаголы этой группы не очень продуктивны.
В принципе, эта группа, она же интересна тем, что там как будто бы у суффикса есть вполне определенное значение. То есть обычно его нет, а там как бы несколько десятков глаголов, и все, в принципе, означают какой-то характерный звук. И при этом они еще в плане номинализации тоже ведут себя достаточно последовательно.
Я пытаюсь вспомнить, просто не могу вспомнить, где я видела это наблюдение, что есть новые глаголы в этой категории. Но вот возникает вопрос, да, если у нас имеется новый глагол в этой категории, типа шебуршать, наверное, да, это, наверное, новый глагол. Не звучит как очень старый. Но, по-моему, шебурша как существительного не существует. Тут же опять же можно сказать, что, может быть, это из-за фонологии, потому что у них да, там будет достаточно сложная кода. Да. В общем, я не знаю, что с этим делать. Да, вот Петя говорит, что еще не ясно, где курица, а где яйцо.
Слушайте, наверное, в конце второго часа лучше не начинать разговор об этом.
Да, спасибо за ссылки дополнительные.
Дорогие коллеги,
Спасибо, Иннокентий. Кеша.
да, дорогие коллеги, ну что, я думаю, уже, мне кажется, пора потихонечку начинать отпускать нашего докладчика, немножко перевести дух.
Процесс отпускания.
Да. Я хотел выразить безмерную благодарность Оре за сегодняшний доклад, за все, что мы услышали, за все, о чем нам по этому поводу теперь предстоит подумать. Спасибо большое, это было прекрасно.
Спасибо большое, что позвали. Мне очень приятно оказаться среди вас.
Спасибо.
И полезно.